Another week done at the public inquiry. Sitting here on Saturday afternoon, trying to make sense of it all, I'm not entirely sure this week was really about the roads, which was what it was purported to be about. Now, don't get me wrong, we spent most of the week talking about roads, road abandonment, road safety, visibility displays, traffic movements, junction designs, heavy goods vehicles, road audits, road standards, and every conceivable variation of the word road you can imagine. But if you take a step back from the engineering drawings and the consultant reports and the endless technical language, I think something else is emerging, and indeed has been over the last number of weeks, coming rapidly now into much sharper focus. Because what we witnessed this week is much more a debate about trust. Trust in institutions and in processes. Trust that public bodies are acting in the public interest, and trust that ordinary people still matter. One of the biggest issues this week continued to be the proposal to abandon part of an existing public road. And the question around this is, can a piece of public infrastructure, such as road, be altered, diminished, or removed primarily to facilitate a private commercial development? It begs the question, do roads not belong to us all, as they are public assets? Following this train of thought, throughout the week, I couldn't help but notice that public interest and the commercial interests are being presented as if they were the same thing. One could be forgiven for thinking that these interests are being intentionally conflated, so lines become blurred. As to where the DfI interest ends in the matter, and that of the company begins, creating ever more confusion. And of course, they are patently not the same thing at all. To get to this position, both parties would have had to consciously adapt their language, and it is noticeable how language is used as the weeks unfold at the public inquiry. Language tells us how people think. Language reframes the message. Language can intentionally create assumptions and ambiguity. We human beings were a bit like fish who swim in a sea of language, and when people stop being people and become receptors, something important gets lost. It is truly the language of corporate colonialism. When used in this way, our lived experience disappears, our community disappears, the reality of our daily lives disappear. We are no longer valued. We no longer count. And what remains is something that can be measured on a spreadsheet. The role of DfI Roads also continues to generate questions. People listening to these proceedings week after week are forming their own opinions. Many are increasingly asking whether DfI Roads is acting as defender of public infrastructure or whether its role has drifted into facilitating the ambitions of the applicant. I know that's an uncomfortable thought, but confidence in institutions depends on people believing that those institutions are independent. Once that confidence starts to erode, everything comes into question. Environmental issues continue to feature heavily through the week also. The gradual upland industrialisation of what is currently a rural landscape. And again, the discussion was wrapped up in technical evidence, but the underlying question remains straightforward. What sort of a place are we leaving behind? And who gets to make that decision? Because once this type of industrialisation occurs, it is really difficult, if not impossible, to reverse. Future generations don't get a vote. They simply inherit whatever bad decisions we make. And if this week is anything to go by, the attitude of the departments en masse seems to be, let's go for growth now, and the future can go to hell. Too bad for the human beings coming behind us. During the week, we also heard discussions around explosives, the carrying of explosives, the delivery of explosives, and risk and safety. And experts can debate probabilities all day long, but local people tend to ask far simpler questions. Will this make my community safe, or less safe? It's not an unreasonable question, and one that is entitled to be heard. But being allowed to come to the table and speak, though, is not quite the same thing as being heard. What I do know is that what we are watching during the course of this public inquiry is actually a test of democratic accountability. And I don't say that lightly. Because when people begin to lose confidence that processes are fair, when communities feel excluded from decisions affecting their lives, and when public bodies appear increasingly distant from the people they are supposed to serve, something important begins to break down. Democratic values don't disappear overnight. They erode gradually, one compromise at a time, one accommodation at a time, one procedural decision at a time, until eventually people wake up and wonder where the hell all the safeguards went. For years we've said that Save Our Sperms is a stand for the air we breathe, the water we drink, the earth that supports us, and the health of communities now and into the future. But listening to proceedings this week, it increasingly feels like we are also becoming a stand for democracy itself. Looking across the Atlantic at the moment, we're seeing what happens when institutions are weakened and democratic norms come under sustained pressure. So as we head into another week of this inquiry, I think the biggest question is no longer whether a road should be abandoned. The bigger question is this: who is this process serving? Because if public inquiries, public bodies and public infrastructure are no longer primarily serving the public, then we have a much bigger conversation on our hands than simply where a road goes. As always, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all next week.